Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. I cannot believe it's episode 275. Whoever coined the term time flies knew what they were talking about. Seemed like it was just the other day, Anika and I were sitting back planning this podcast, but that was now fall of 2017. But here we are, and I want to start by thanking every single person who has ever financially supported this podcast. You know, we made a decision from the start, Anika and I. We believed that we could run a podcast and not have any interruptions, no commercials. 10 to 10, well, now it's 10 to 12 hours a week of content, counting Monday and Thursday. It wasn't that much when we started, but even that it was half that. And we just believed that if we produced quality enough content, there would be people out there that would appreciate it. It would financially support us so that we wouldn't have to go out and have commercial interference. And you guys have really stepped up to the plate. I'm so grateful for everyone who's ever given a financial gift, and they are so appreciated. And they're the reason why we've been able to expand to twice a week. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And friends, if you've never given and you'd like to support our podcast, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. We only mention donations every 25 episodes. So I mentioned it on 250. I won't bring it up again until episode 300, but we could certainly use your resources. We have a lot of things that we have planned, and if we get the resources, we can only serve you guys even better. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Also want to thank everyone who's given us a comment, 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. We so appreciate those reviews. They inspire our team. You know, we share them with our team, and they fire us up. So thank you for your contributions and for your reviews. So today, there's a few things I want to talk about. I mostly want to focus on a big announcement in the news. You probably can guess what it is already, but before I get to that, I realized that last week after I shared some reference books that I feel everyone should have in their library, I was like, oh, snap, I forgot an important one. So the nice thing about twice a week episodes is you get a chance to get mid-course corrections when you mess up. So I have to shout out a book I really love. I've only had this book for under a year, but I find myself going to it a lot. It's called College is Worth Your Money. It's produced by the College Transitions team, and they just do outstanding research. It's a different kind of guide. It looks at ROI, looks at return on your investment. Now, it does focus on what they regard as the top 150 colleges. Obviously, there's some subjectivity involved in that, but you get 75 key statistics, data. It's a data-related book, so statistics galore. Some of the statistics there I haven't found anywhere else, and it's very outcome-based, so you can see a lot of things like income and job placement and mid-year career internships, and that kind of data is really there. It's really rich. It has information, for example, it has information like the ratio of students to members in the Career Center. So you can see how much resources are being put into the Career Center. So this book is really, really worth your money. That's why it's got a good name. College is worth your money is worth your money. But you know, I have a voice in my head sometimes, and I really appreciate this. This is from one of our devout listeners who always reminds me, Mark, please keep telling people they can always go to their local library. It's an undervalued resource. So I don't always have to say, buy the book. I'm someone who personally likes to have these things either on my Kindle or in my home paperback or on Kindle. A lot of times I have it both ways. But the local library is a fantastic resource if you don't, if you don't want to spend any money or if you're a little financially tight right now. So I had to get that in there. Colleges Worth Your Money, produced by the College Transitions team. All right, as promised, I said that I will be sharing reflections, as I've been doing a lot of reflecting on two conferences I went to in September, the NCAN conference and the NatCat conference. And then one I went to in October, the College Board Conference. And today I want to draw off of the NCAN conference. So I just want to share a little bit about NCAN. So NCAN's just absolutely a fantastic organization. It's an organization that it's just NCAN, and it's an acronym. And it used to stand for the National College Access Network. But they did do a rebranding in 2020, now the National College Attainment Network. But the mission is the same, and the mission of NCAN is to build, strengthen, and empower communities and stakeholders to close equity gaps in post-secondary attainment for all students. So basically what they're committed to doing is bridging the achievement gap when it comes to college graduation and results. And so they're looking at a lot of things like access and affordability. So when you go to an NCAN conference, you're really surrounded by a lot of professionals who do access work or have a strong commitment and mission to access. And so this particular conference had over 1,100 access professionals. And the nice thing about NCAN is they're very connected to what's going on in Washington. So they're headquartered in Washington, and they kind of know how to work Washington. So they're doing the lobbyist and doing everything they can to make sure that they're constantly getting in front of congressmen, senators with proposals that will benefit the masses when it comes to their mission, closing equity gaps in post-secondary attainment for all students. And so you can imagine going to a conference like that at this time of year. Two of the really, really hot topics where there are a lot of workshops, seminars, speakers had to do with the new FAFSA, which is pretty significant overtaking. FAFSA simplification, we've talked about it quite a bit on here. And so I went to quite a few sessions on that. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that later. I know I've already had Mark Kantrowitz on for an interview on that. But as we get closer into next summer, got a fantastic guest who's going to come back on, and we'll get into that in a lot more detail. But the other hot topic they talked about, and that's the one I want to talk to you guys about today before I introduce our speaker, and that is student loan forgiveness. And so I attended a couple workshops on that. And from some of the brightest minds and the top attorneys and people that were connected to Washington and talking to the senators and the powers that be. And one particular session I attended, they said, remember, this was after it had already passed, because it got passed in August. Sorry, declared really by Biden, not passed. It was an important distinction. And so this is mid-September. I was at NCAN from 12th, 13th, 14th of September. They said, hold your horses, because I do expect some significant legal challenges. So there is a possibility that this may not go through. And a few weeks ago, you remember I told everybody to go to studentaid.gov. It takes 5 minutes, register. Over 40 million people are eligible for student loan forgiveness. So very large percentage of the American public, adult public in particular. And I said, it only takes 5 minutes, Well, it didn't take long for some blowback. It's funny how things repeat themselves. A lot of people are familiar with the very famous Brown versus Board of Education decision, Supreme Court decision, arguably the most famous Supreme Court decision, 1954, Topeka, Kansas, that said separate and equal is no longer legal, overruling the Plessy-Ferguson 1896 decision. Why do I say that? Well, we have a new case, and the name sounds eerily familiar. It's Brown versus the Department of Education. So what's going on? Well, on November 10th, 2022, a U.S. District Court judge in Texas, one of these Trump-appointed judges, sided with plaintiffs in what's being called Brown versus the Department of Education. Now, this is a lawsuit, and the plaintiffs basically were asking to halt the loan forgiveness program. And what the plaintiffs argued was that the Department of Education illegally ignored the Administrative Procedure Act notice and comment requirement, which required federal agencies to seek public comment before making a rule. And so the judge blocked the loan forgiveness program after declaring it was unlawful. And then initially when that happened, the Department of Education was still taking applications. But on November 11th, 2022, not very long ago, a few days ago, the application form for the student loan forgiveness program was taken down. And so this was a quote: "Courts have issued orders blocking our student debt relief program." The web page for the application form read on November 11th, "As a result, at this time, we are not accepting any applications. We are seeking to overturn those orders." So the Biden administration is planning on appealing. This is going to be a long, drawn-out scenario. And quite honestly, this is a debacle. This is a mess because you have millions of Americans looking forward to debt relief. Now it's being overturned. What's going to happen? Is the Biden administration going to do another pause? They said the pauses were stopping in January, and part of the deal with the loan forgiveness was that if, other than that $10,000 or $20,000 if you were a Pell recipient, and remember, this extended to all federal loans, even Parent Plus loans. Part of the deal was that you were going to have to resume making payments effective in January. So now, who knows what's going to happen? Are they going to extend the pause again? If they do, there's going to be a lot of blowback because there's going to be some voices that are going to say that's going to increase the debt, and this is why we have inflation. So it's really controversial. This is one of the reasons why Biden took so long to announce that he was going to move forward with loan forgiveness, was because a lot of people didn't know if it was constitutional for an executive to make a decision like that. Now, it had been a campaign promise, so he had built the expectations because he promised it on the campaign. But budget decisions are normally made by Congress, and this is not something that they could get through, even with the Democratic House and Senate. They couldn't get nowadays in the Senate. You need 60 votes because you have to protect yourself against a filibuster, and they couldn't get 60 votes. It was pretty much being done along partisan lines. And so you couldn't get everybody to go along, and there was clearly no way they were going to get 60 votes. So finally, he unilaterally made the decision, and it's still controversial, and different legal experts have different opinions as to whether or not it's constitutional. So now you got a real problem, and we'll have to come back to this again and see where it goes, because I have no idea where this is going to end up. But one thing that won't surprise me, I have to admit, 16 million people had filled out the form online for debt forgiveness. And it won't surprise me if at the end of the day, the courts rule that those 16 million can have their debt forgiven, but anybody who didn't fill it out moving forward cannot. And I don't know that. I mean, the whole thing you could see every scenario from you're allowed to enact exactly what Biden said he was going to do, 40 plus million, or nobody gets it. I mean, or something in between, like those who've already filed the paperwork. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. And even if I was, I'm not the judge is making the decision. Here's what I do think. I think this probably has a really good chance of ultimately going to the Supreme Court. And in the 6-3 conservative court we have now, if I was to bet, I'm not really that optimistic. But once again, my opinion really doesn't matter. I'm just giving you an update on where we're at, and it's definitely something worth following. You're going to have a lot of angry people. Now, here's the other side. You're going to have a lot of very irate, agitated people who were led to believe they were going to have a benefit and then have the rug pulled from under them. And angry people go to the polls, and that scares politicians. So I do think in the end of the day, something is going to get done, but that could literally be years. So stay tuned.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, I have to tell you about a friend of mine who I had the privilege of talking to, and you'll be hearing from her over the next 3 weeks. Her name is Arlene Cash, and she's a giant in the admissions world. She's been doing this for 5 decades. And you don't get somebody that's had 5 decades of experience very often. We've been blessed to have quite a few people on the podcast over the years with 5 decades of experience, but nobody that's worked at 11 institutions, that's for sure. That doubles our record. And so there's just a breadth of wisdom and experience that you have when you work at 5 institutions. But before we had this podcast back from 2012 to 2014, I worked on a 10-hour college admissions video series called Game Changer. I was privileged to have Arlene be a part of that and went and record it with her. And so we go all the way back to my days at the Westtown School when Susan and I were working on a national college fair, and we'd bring Arlene as a keynote for us. So with no further ado, over the next 3 weeks, listen and enjoy to the wisdom from Arlene Cash. Friends, I'm here with one of the real giants in the admission profession. Hi, Arlene Cash. How are you?
I'm well, Mark Stoker. How are you?
Good, good. Do you know we go back almost 20 years now, back to you coming in as a keynote speaker for Susan and I at Westtown?
I want to say more than 20 years.
It may be.
Let's leave it at that.
Yes, yeah. So I'm really happy to reconnect with Arlene. We've stayed in touch. In fact, I had lunch with you at Spelman, but that was probably now a good 10, 12 years ago, too.
That was 14 years ago. Mark.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right.
And I was so honored to have you accept our invitation to be one of our thought leaders and come on the podcast. So, we've had quite a few people on the podcast. I don't say quite a few, maybe 7 or 8 that have 40 years experience in admissions. But I think the most institutions anyone has ever been at is 5. And I know you blow that away. You have the new record. So what I would love for you to do is walk us through your career. And if you can remember to mention all the different stops you've had along the way, because you've been at quite a few places over your illustrious career.
I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. Otherwise, we'll take up the whole podcast with my resume. But let's just say I started out straight out of grad school at Kent State University, where I led graduate recruitment and one of the first McNair fellowship programs where I was allowed to take about $600,000 and go around the country recruiting people of color for graduate programs. That really got me hooked on college recruitment and the admissions and enrollment field. I went from there, came back to my hometown, Massachusetts, and worked at Brandeis University. From there, I went to Boston University, spent some good time at both institutions, and decided to move a little bit west in Massachusetts up to UMass Amherst, where I spent about 5 years as the dean of admissions. That was amazing, and living in the Valley and working with in the what we call the Valley with the other higher education institutions, Mount Holyoke, Smith, all of them, Amherst. It was just such an honor and a pleasure to be in such a rich higher education environment. I left UMass Amherst and went south, very south, or southwest, to the University of Arkansas, where I was the Dean of Enrollment Management. And moving from the Dean of Admissions to the Dean of Enrollment Management was really quite a trek, because it really took the whole concept of your focus on just students coming in to looking at the broader spectrum of you're looking at the students coming in, because you want to make sure you have the students who are going to be successful while they're there and leaving. And so I really was excited about this transition into the bigger area of enrollment management and have stayed there for the rest of my career. I went from the University of Arkansas further south to Spelman College, spent 10 years at Spelman College as the Vice President for Enrollment, the inaugural Vice President for Enrollment Management. From Spelman College, from Spelman, I did some consulting at Bennett College, which was going through some ups and downs, and really working with Dr. Esther Terry and sort of right-sizing that program. They're back with accreditation now, so we're really proud and happy about what's happening at Bennett. But from Bennett, I went to the University of the Pacific. So from the south, from the sort of southwest, Arkansas, to the south, Spelman, to the University of the Pacific, very west in California. And from there, I went to Guilford College back in North Carolina. And from Guilford College, I went up to the mountains of Maryland, Frostburg State University. And from Frostburg State University, we had COVID. I returned to my home in Georgia, where I felt safe for a little while. And as things settled down a little bit and virtual opportunities presented themselves, I went to the San Francisco Art Institute. And the San Francisco Art Institute actually was on the brink of closing. I went there to work with their chief operating officer and provost, bringing in students, and brought a significant number of students in. But as we all know, tuition does not fund an institution, and if you don't have the other funds to support it, it's not going to happen. And so I'm currently in San Francisco, California, working on the closing of the San Francisco Art Institute, unfortunately, one of the great iconic institutions of higher education connected to the fine arts specifically. So that's where I am, and that's why I got here.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you sharing the breadth of your experiences, because I think people will understand now when you speak with a gravitas of having seen a lot of different institutions, pretty much everything imaginable in admissions, over your career. And, it's funny, not too long ago, not that many episodes ago, we did talk about, San Francisco Art Institute, 151 years. And it looked like University of California, San Francisco was going to purchase them for a while. The merger was going to happen, and then it fell through. So we've been tracking that and staying apprised of that. So Arlene, I'm just going to leave it wide open. What are some of the things that have been highlights for you, would you say, in your admissions career?
So I like to look at my career as one that has transitioned, as I mentioned earlier, from just admissions to the whole enrollment spectrum, because probably the highlight has been being able to work with students on their interests, on their goals and their objectives in life, and helping them see how they can do it at different kinds of institutions of higher education. So when you're looking at the difference between, say, UMass Amherst and a Brandeis and a Spelman and a San Francisco Art Institute, those are, the kinds of students who will be successful at each one really would be very, very different for each of those kinds of institutions. You have a large land grant research university. You have a small, very focused arts institution. You have an HBCU for women, and you have a small private religious founded institution. What kind of student will be good at those kinds of schools? So much of my work certainly has been in those institutions, but I think the most important part has been outside of the institutions, working with families, talking at conferences, and working with individuals, helping them understand how to make the best fit, how to make the best choices for their children or for themselves, and helping schools really understand better how to recruit students who would be doing very well there. I'm working with an organization called the Character Collaborative. You're probably familiar with that.
Yes.
That group, Mark. And with the Character Collaborative, what we're really trying to do is help move admissions away from the sort of cut and dry, black and white standardization of here are your SAT scores, here's your grade point average, therefore you should be at this school. And really connecting students' character, those things that are important to them, with the kinds of things that are at the core of each institution of higher education, so that not only you're recruiting students who would do well academically, but who would thrive as individuals. And I think that's really part of the higher ed experience, that thriving as an individual.
You might have just answered this question for me, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and maybe there's something else that you'll want to add. I wanted to ask you, having been at such a breadth of institutions, and knowing the frenzy that is out there, especially in more upwardly mobile communities, suburbs, private, all of them, all across the country, what is it that the public's not understanding that they should understand when you look at the way the average person sort of approaches the whole decision of where should I go to college? What do you feel is maybe not emphasized enough, or maybe is emphasized too much? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, do we have a couple of weeks? I have lots of thought about
Well,
that.
you go. You go, and I'm all ears. I respect those gray hairs you have.
Well, plenty of them. Thank you. People will look at the process of higher education in two different ways. There are the individuals, maybe your first gen student who really has no experience and no one around them experienced at navigating this. And then you have those who may be third or fourth generation who I think have too much experience navigating it. And so I'm going to start with the latter to say people make it such a stressful situation when it does not need to be stressful. I once participated in a study with the College Board where we talked about the stress of higher education, and the workshop or the webcast actually was supposed to focus on how stressful the college education was. And what I was determined to do, and what we ended up seeing, was that it does not have to be that stressful. Most institutions of higher education, the vast majority, are accepting most of the students who are applying, number one. Number two, there's a school for you. And sure, if you're applying to the 0.1% of schools that are accepting only 17 and 15% of the applications, it's going to be a challenge. But if you're looking at a school that really has the academic program, the environment, the history, legacy, the values that are important to you, the kind of support you need, and things like internships, my goodness, you are going to have so many options that it should not be stressful. So I would say that those of us who have a lot of experience from our parents having gone to college and our grandparents having gone to college, we might be overthinking this for our children or for the students that we are advising, and really helping the student think about just what's important to you and how does that match with what is really important to an institution of higher education. And once again, I think we go back to character and looking at the person, and how schools are really paying more attention to the person versus the SATs or GPA. MIT is doing such a great job of putting that on their website, and you go there and you really see most important things are talking about who are you and why are you wanting to go to college and why is this a good school? And eventually you get to things like grades and all that. And sure, MIT is very selective, but they're selective and they're looking at the student and the character of the student. Then you have on the other side, the student who may have zero experience in the college going process. They may be first generation and there's no one around them pushing them to do the extra things. And they're nervous because they feel as though they're not good enough. And so I want to say to those students as well, there is a college for you. And you are not only good enough, you are great enough to be, for any school to be honored by having you in there. But you have to put yourself out there. So if you have a grade point average of a 3.5 or 3.8, don't be hesitant to apply to those more selective schools. They are looking for students just like you, but you have to apply to them. I read something yesterday where they were talking about almost 60% of the students who are in the lower income area have better grade point averages than the average of some of the most selective schools. These students are almost cutting themselves out of the process because they're nervous about applying to these schools. Apply to more than one school. Think about this kind of schools you want to go to and really seek the kind of school that has the values and the center in an area or a perspective that's important to you.
So I want to follow up with that because what I want to ask you is, how can a student figure out the character of a school? You know, there's a lot of things coming at students. There's rankings, there's all this buzz amongst peers, and then there's all of the glossy mailers they're getting and the emails they're getting blitzed with. So there's a lot of noise. How can somebody break through all of that to really understand the character of a school and whether or not it is a character fit or personality fit, maybe I should say?
Yeah, so I think stop looking at the glitzy brochures. Don't worry too much about the spiel that you're getting in all the emails, and look inside the institution. What kinds of clubs and organizations do they have? What kinds of things, initiatives are they taking upon themselves at the institution? You know, how are they addressing every single day the LGBTQ issues that might be coming up for students? What are the support programs for all students? What kind of things are up in the library? Walk around the library and look on the walls. Look at the kinds of books that they're featuring. Who's writing? Look at the faculty. So move away from what they're sending you and have the student drive this process. As a student driving this process, look at the school from a different perspective, not from what you're being given, but for what you want to give. Is this a school where you feel like you can pour into it and make the school a better place? Because I tell you, I'm always looking for the student who's going to come into my institution and make us better because they're here. And that's the student that's really researched and seen this is a school that where I can grow, but I can also help be a part of their growth.
Thank you, Arlene. So, Arlene, I know you've been at a wide range of schools when it comes to sort of their financial resources, right? You've been at some schools that were on a shoestring budget and some other schools that were more flush with cash. How important is it as a parent and a student looking at a school to do some type of assessment of the financial health of the school?
Oh, I think it's very important because it really just talks about the resources that are available to a student. Now, wealth in higher education runs a really big spectrum. And I think that so it's like a bell curve. You can't pay too much attention to the ones, the very, very wealthy, your Harvards, your Stanfords. I mean, you just can't compare anything to that. And you can't compare either to the San Francisco Art Institutes or the Bennetts, where, they are really literally running on a shoestring. But in that vast middle, you want to make sure that schools have a reasonable student to faculty ratio. And you have to have funds to be able to do that, to be able to fund a faculty where you have maybe 18 or 20 students per faculty member. You also want to make sure that the institution's facilities are in good shape. That's important. So you want to make sure that they have the funding for doing that kind of thing. Also, supporting your student as a parent, supporting your student for tutoring, making sure they have access to internships, a strong career center. All of things cost money. So I think the financial health of an institution is important. You don't want to go to a school where they may be closing next year or that year. You also don't want to go to a school where you feel like you're being bought, where you're feeling like, oh, they have we call a lazy river and a climbing wall and your own, video production studio. I mean, that's great to have. It's a wonderful asset, but really you want to be able to talk to faculty. You want to have a good relationship with faculty. You want to live in accommodations that are healthy and supportive. And you want to have the kind of support services, whether they're for your wellness or for your academic support.
So there's a couple of resources that most websites have if you search. One is a Department of Institutional Research, and another is their strategic plan. How should students and families use those resources?
I would suggest that they not pay a whole lot of attention to the institutional strategic plan, Mark, because those are internally works in progress. I'm constantly working with schools on developing strategic enrollment plans, which are born usually out of a strategic plan. And they're in flux all the time. They're dependent on internal issues and external influences. And so I think students and families should not pay a lot of attention to strategic plans. But institutional research has a lot of good information. Okay, get on that IR page, and you're going to start see things like graduation rates. You're going to start seeing things like acceptance rates. You're going to see things like the diversity of the campus, not only racial diversity but geographic diversity. Is everybody going to be from the same town, or does it have a worldwide student perspective? If you're looking for diversity, you want to make sure that you're going to a school that has students from other countries and other states. Certainly, if you really want a school close to home, that's fine too. And you'll find people who have really share your culture and share your background, and they're right there with you. So I think the IR page is a hidden gem of information. I'm glad you mentioned that. I've never really thought about it. But I'm adding that to my toolkit. Going to the IR page. Thank you.
No, thank you for what you said about the strategic plan. So I just want to follow up on that. Is your concern that school has a strategic plan, but then there's turnover with the president, whatever, and they keep starting from scratch, and it changes so much that if you make too many inferences from looking at it and you think, oh, this is what I'm going to get, there's a good chance that you're not going to get that because it may reflect maybe an aspirational goal, but it's not. Oftentimes, it ends up not being implemented. Was that kind of what you were addressing? Was that what you were addressing?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That so the average lifetime of a president on a college, I think, is what, 7 years now. And so when you see that turnover, I have never worked in a school where there was a new president that didn't bring a new strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, it happens. And it may be a whole 180 in the strategic plan. I think a great example might be actually Spelman College, where when Dr. Tatum was there, it was very oriented towards research and building up the academic programs and the more liberal arts and research aspect of it. And when the new president came in, it was very arts focused. It was very moving towards the cultural aspect of the students' experience. Both wonderful, but both also very, very different. Here's what's interesting about both presidents. They stuck with the core. They stuck with the core values of the institution. And I think that when you really want to know a school, look at what's been common, the common thread that's been that goes throughout each strategic plan, through each all of the materials. If you see that common core value echoed on and on and on through the years, you know it's a school that's sustainable, that they have a plan, an internal plan that's sustainable throughout the ages, regardless of who's in charge of it, and regardless of the focus of that year or that decade's strategic plan.
Friends, this concludes the first part of our 3-part interview. I hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3. Friends, on Thursday, Julia is in the saddle, and we're going to be talking about an article by Liz Willand from the Hechinger Report called Why Some in Higher Education Are Freaking Out About New Affirmative Action Showdown. A number of you have written to us and said, are you guys going to talk about affirmative action? I mean, some pretty significant things are going on regarding affirmative action. And, we don't shy away from talking about any hot topic. And so we'll absolutely be discussing what's going on with affirmative action. We'll talk about this article, but then we just have a candid conversation about affirmative action. So look forward to that on Thursday. It is bonus content time. So Lisa and I will be discussing a two-part series, if you want to call it that, looking at 8 questions to ask if you're trying to figure out if a school is really test optional or if they have a preference for test scores and they're just maybe masquerading as being test optional, but in reality they like test scores. Or maybe they're not masquerading. Maybe you just never really clearly listened to what they were saying all along. It's an important 2-part series because I'm noticing a shift from some schools as we move into now, this is year 3 or year 4, I'm getting confused, since the pandemic, and scores are able to be obtained now for the most part. There's very few places where you can say, I just can't access the test. There's still some, but very few. So now that we're here, we're at a crossroads, and I'm noticing some schools are slipping back in their language to indicate a strong preference for scores. And I just want people to be aware of that. And so I take you through 8 questions to ask when you're looking at, is a school have a strong preference for test scores or not? And so I think you'll find it to be really interesting. Lisa and I just recorded it. I've actually edited it already, and I think it came out pretty good. So hopefully you'll enjoy that over the next couple of weeks. And friends, I'm very excited about our interview. We started a brand new interview. I think you're going to really like it a lot. It's a 2-parter. It's with Miljan Trulove, the VP of Enrollment, Reed College in Portland, Oregon. And we look at why Reed decided to not participate with U.S. News and World Report when it came to rankings. What were the reasons they did that? And what can we learn from their decision? Fascinating, candid conversation. I think you'll learn a lot about U.S. News and World rankings, how they're done. And I think you'll come away with a newfound respect for the bold initiative that Reed took and said, U.S. News, go pound sand. We're not participating in your rankings. And so Miljan, very, very impressive leader, doing a lot of great things, charming, dedicated, insightful. It's a two-parter, and I think you'll enjoy it. There'll be no spotlight on Thursday, but I will return with a spotlight, a homegrown version, the following week on George Washington University. Hope you'll tune in and join us, everybody, on Thursday. And remember, it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what's going to determine your career trajectory. See you on Thursday. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.